Buenos días a todos. Vamos a iniciar con nuestro taller sobre la monetización de la propiedad intelectual bajo el concepto de transformar las ideas en capital. Como no puedo escucharme acá, por favor si me levantan la mano solo para saber que estamos oyendo bien. Perfecto, muy bien. Además no veo con esas luces a todos allá. Pero bien, pues vamos a arrancar con el taller, como decía, con dos personas que tienen una experiencia importante en los temas de monetización, estrategias de monetización, estrategias para lo que es precisamente llevar al mercado después intangibles, eh, experiencias en el área de licenciamiento, de estructuraciones, y que definitivamente nos van a dar una visión complementaria al trabajo legal de cómo se genera toda esta discusión respecto de el valor de estos intangibles y el proceso que conlleva el determinar cómo convertir esto en un capital para la empresa. Para ello tendremos hoy la presencia de Dave Kaufman. Dave Kaufman es el director de propiedad intelectual de AT&T, y voy a pasarme un poco a inglés para la referencia de Dave. And Dave at AT&T, he leads the company's strategic IP portfolio development and monetization efforts. In this role, Dave draws from his wide-ranging career experience in bringing technology to the market for Fortune 500 enterprises and early-stage companies both in North America and internationally. Before joining AT&T, they co-founded mobile transportation company RideCell and led marketing for Elastic Network, taking the company public and later through acquisitions. He also served as the Venture Lab Fellow at Georgia Institute of Technology and led engineering for EMS technologies, developing communication systems for the aerospace and transportation industries. Dave has a large experience internationally in currently conducting licensing monetization processes for AT&T, where his role is developing partnership with other companies that can use this technology in their businesses. On the other hand, we have André Matías. André es director de estrategia de marca y valoración para Interbrand en Sao Paulo. Él dirige proyectos desplegando su talento creativo con un rigor analítico que está precisamente puesto para efectos de la estrategización del valor de las marcas, con el ánimo de potenciar el verdadero valor desde la perspectiva imaginativa, inspiradora e inteligente que, como decíamos, agregue valor a estos intangibles de los clientes. Desde que se unió a Interbrand, André ha estado participando y apoyando a empresas brasileñas, españolas y portuguesas en guiar sus decisiones comerciales en los mercados en los que participan. Desde 2007, André ha sido parte del equipo responsable de Best Global Brands, calificado como el estudio de referencia más influyente de los CEOs, y también en el Best Brazilian Brands, con una excelente cobertura en medios del mercadeo brasileño. André tiene una licenciatura en Administración de Empresas del Instituto Fundación Getúlio Vargas en Sao Paulo, con un MBA internacional en el Instituto de Empresa, una de las escuelas más reconocidas del mundo en esta área, en Madrid. Y anteriormente trabajó con Banco Itaú, con Telefónica y con Accor Servicios en Brasil. André pues, nos va a compartir también la parte específica de cómo determinar el valor de la marca, diferentes metodologías de evaluación y cómo estos temas se pueden llevar después al mercado, concretándolos en realidades de beneficio con los diferentes actores que participan en ello y convirtiendo estas ideas, como decíamos, en capital. Creo que es un tema por sí bastante interesante, con dos personas que tienen la experiencia práctica de llevar precisamente la propiedad intelectual al mercado a través de generar valor para las compañías y que nos permitirá completar la visión legal con la visión técnica de quienes trabajan en estos esfuerzos para convertir en valor los intangibles de las empresas. Vamos a arrancar ahora y bienvenidos a todos a este panel. Thank you. And now, before we move to to Andres' presentation, probably something that is applicable to both technology and trademark when you're looking at this from the perspective of the company, is that as as Dave anticipated, you need to bring in a team. That team needs to know exactly what their area has to take care of in the process. And here I refer to other type of monetizing IP as when you're structuring or restructuring within a corporation intercompany relations on technology, brands. You also talk about the grant back of licenses. We have to be careful because in certain jurisdictions, um, this may have certain limitations. So from a legal perspective, councils need to understand, not necessarily to be the experts on all the areas, but to understand that they need to um, have a clear picture of those different scenarios that are to be met in order to make a successful use of the value of IP. There are some times, and you may have experienced this, in which some companies decide to take their trademarks to a different jurisdiction and then license back to the operational company. What happens in some jurisdictions is that that license granted back is subject to limitations. It's either if you're paying royalties, those royalties are not going to be deductible for income taxes purposes, and therefore it has very little sense to do the operation in that from that perspective. You also have to bear in mind that under the Organization for Economic Cooperation, there are several guidelines that have been put in place and that we may need to understand and follow, such as the BEPS, the base eruption profit shifting practices. Because nowadays, um, there is a lot of follow-up internationally on how you also use intellectual property to shift the earnings, to shift the profit from one jurisdiction to the other. So when you're approaching a restructuring process and you're negotiating agreements, you have to make sure that the different jurisdictions that are going to be engaged do not pose a greater risk to the operation and won't represent a, I will say, rather than an increase in the efficiency from a finance point of view, a restriction to it. We also have to bear in mind when dealing with IP valuation that there are other areas related to the audit part that need to be taken into account. If we're talking about related companies, either local or foreign related companies in different jurisdictions, you also have to look at the statutes locally regarding transfer pricing, whether this will be applicable and what will be the impact. Because nowadays, there is a growing concern in countries to ensure that the practices in taking value out of IP is arm's length. So all of these details are important when looking at the structure as a whole. As a council, you need to look at this in a 360 way. Make sure that you take all of these points into account because you may have a great agreement in terms of licensing the technology, bring in a restructuring in terms of the agreement again. But in practice, it will face a lot of limitations because there are several issues in place that won't allow it to be efficient. Also, it is important to bear in mind what are the different relations in terms of international treaties that the jurisdictions have, particularly those to avoid double taxation. So all of this, again, I stress, is something that as councils we need to bear in mind in order to look at the different models of taking advantage of the value of IP. So having said this, I will then turn to Andre in order to get the other side of the equation in this case, which is trademark. Andre's experience in evaluating trademarks, getting them into the market, um, doing the efforts to gain space in that market, which is a very competitive one nowadays, will allow us to go through this process, learn a bit of the details, technical details that are engaged in that process. And then we'll also ask Andre to share with us how does he interact when it comes to that phase with councils? What is he expecting to get from them? So please, Andre,
Thank you.
the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Dave, for your presentation. It was really interesting. And I'll try to connect a little bit of what you said with what we're bringing here today. Can you guys hear me? Okay. I'm from Interbrand. Interbrand is a brand consultancy. So we are creating and managing brands. And one of the things that Interbrand does worldwide is brand valuation. So Interbrand created the methodology, and I'm going to present a little bit of this methodology 30 years ago. And the objective is not only to understand how much is a brand worth so that I can put it in my balance sheet so I can charge royalties for using it, but also to understand how I can generate value. So where is this value coming from? And it links a lot with this customer approach that Dave was talking about. So I'm here to talk about how brands generate value and to talk a little bit about brand valuation. When we think about brands and we start thinking about trademarks and logos and identities, here in Interbrand we have a definition of what is a brand and how we define a brand. And basically, brand for us is a living asset. So it's an asset of the company and should be taken care of, brought to life across all touch points. So it's a living asset. We have to take care of it every day. And it's getting into life across all touch points. So every experience that you have with the brand, we're not talking about the logo, we're not talking about the identity. Every experience that you have with the brand is important to create identification, differentiation, and financial value. So if the brand doesn't relate to the client, to the customer, it doesn't make sense. If the brand is not differentiated from its main competitors, it's not going to be chosen. In the end of the day, when we think about brands and we think about identity and everything that we are creating, at the end of the day, it's generate financial value. And this is why we are here today. And this is why we're talking about IP monetization. Is because there is interest in creating this financial value. How they generate value? First of all, if I'm choosing for a cell phone and I'm looking for different options in the market and I choose this one instead of the other ones, I'm bringing money and I'm increasing revenue for the owner of that cell phone. So this is the first lever of creating and generating brand value. The second one, if I'm able and I'm willing to pay a little bit more for that cell phone, sometimes a lot more for that cell phone, I'm increasing the margins of the owner. So I'm increasing profits of the owner of that product. And also, if I'm buying not only one product, but I'm willing to buy other products, and I'm willing to recommend those products to my friends, to my family, I'm increasing loyalty. And if I'm increasing loyalty, I'm reducing risk. Whenever Apple launches a new cell phone or a new Apple Watch or iPad, they know that they're going to sell a certain amount of products. This is loyalty. This is risk reduction. So strong brands have lower risks than main competitors. This is clear, and this is quite obvious when we think about the consumer, the customers, but also when we think about other stakeholders of the company, for investors. If I'm attracting more money and I'm knowing the risk of that company is reduced, I'm generating value. If I can attract more employees, if I can have a lower turnover of employees, I'm generating more money. If I'm bringing the best partners or I'm working with the best suppliers, I'm also generating more value because I can have a much higher bargain power than my main competitors. So this is value. This is what when we publish the best global brands or the best Brazilian brands, this is what we are measuring. How those brands are generating this kind of value and how those brands are connecting to the consumers to generate money in the end of the day. This methodology, as I said, was created 30 years ago. So it's quite new. Valuing brands is something that is quite new, and it was created for this company that doesn't exist anymore. It's called Hanks Ruvis McDowell, an Australian group that was suffering a hostile takeover, and they called the Interbrand and say, "Okay, Interbrand, help us. We are much more worth than what they are offering to us. So help us prove that our assets here inside of the company are valuable, and one of those assets are the brands that we have it for our product. So let's prove to the market that we are more worth than what is going to be offered." So together with London Business School, Interbrand developed this methodology that I'm going to present to you guys. And from 88 to the 90s, from the beginning of 2000, this methodology was really considered to buy or sell brands. So I'm buying a company and I have to value the whole company. And among those assets of the company, I have to check how much the brands are worth. But when we launched the first Best Global Brands study in 2000, here in Brazil, 2001, the Best Brazilian Brand study, they started to see that the brands are not only valuable so that I can sell, so that I can license, so that I can and so that I can buy some company, but also as an asset for the company, as a valuable asset to drive choice for the customers, as a valuable asset to drive differentiation from the market. So companies start thinking about this brand valuation and about this brand value, not only in legal terms or financial terms, but also for the strategy of the brand, to better understand what are the levers that I should change in each of the constructions of the brand to make sure that I go up in this table, to make sure that I generate value for this table. In 2010, because many other companies appeared looking to value brands and to understand the value of the brand, ISO, the organization, created an ISO only for the brand valuation methodologies. When we talk about valuation, we are talking about an opinion, an expert opinion, but an outsider opinion of a value. So we have to make sure that we have the same standards of valuing it. When we're talking about intangibles, it's easy to get to different perceptions of what is worth and what is not worth. So ISO came to develop this specific brand valuation parameter. And why companies call Interbrand to evaluate their brands? Why companies look for this brand valuation? First of all, we have this more financial side and more legal side when we're talking about, for example, M&As. So I'm buying a company and I'm buying the brand inside of this company, so I have to value it. It can be 80-something% of the total value of the company, so I have to understand better what is the number coming from. For example, licensing. So I have to charge for the use of my brand, so I have to understand how much is it worth. For financing, sometimes I'm putting my brand as a warranty for some financing operation that I'm doing for my company, so I have to understand better what is the value of it. Taxing, for example. So as Marco was saying, organizing sometimes and using the brands to better distribute the results of the company among different subsidiaries. So this is a world that the brand valuation is important to understand the value of the brand today. You might not care a lot, and it's hard to see this happening today, but you don't care a lot of what is going to be the value for the next 10 years or for the next 20 years. It's only focused in today. Sometimes brand valuation can also help for a business case solution. We have a great example here with AT&T. Interbrand was called by SBC at that time when SBC called AT&T, 2005 maybe. So SBC bought AT&T, and they had to decide which brand they would go as the corporate brand and the product brands. With brand valuation, Interbrand proved that AT&T was the brand that was more valuable and could drive more choice into the long term. So this is how AT&T defined, how SBC defined that AT&T should be the brand for the corporate. So this is a more punctual also. It's a need for the business to understand where are we generating more value. But there are companies that are doing brand valuation every year or every 2 years to better understand this asset that can be like 60% or 70% of the total value of the company. They have to understand how they're generating value with it. So every year, Samsung, for example, does a brand valuation with Interbrand to understand what they're doing globally and how the brand is generating value. And then you have the whole company, not only the marketing team or the communications team, but you have the whole company working together to generate brand value. Because if I develop a product that is linked to what my consumer wants, I generate results. If I have my employees working and transmitting the equities and the values that my brand wants to transmit to the market, I generate brand value. So everybody understands better how to generate those results. How do we calculate, how we get to this financial value of brand? How can we measure in a tangible way this intangible that is called the brand? There are three main methodologies in the market. The first one is income-based. So we are going to check how much this asset, this brand, is responsible for generating future results. So we see all the result of the company, and we see all the result of the business, and we see how much the brand is influencing this result.
Sorry to interrupt, Andret. Are you referring there to the DCF model? Is that a discount?
It's kind of a DCF. I'm going to show
discounted cash flow
flows. Yeah.
for DCF.
I'm going to show it in more details because it's Interbrand's methodology, so I can show it with more details. But yes, it is checking how much value and how much financial value this business is going to make for the next 5 to 10 years. And then we see the influence of the brand inside of that financial value. So if I'm generating $500 million in 10 years, from that $500 million, how much is brand and how much is other things? I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes. Second one would be like market-based or comparables-based valuation. So if I'm in this technology sector and I'm going to value my brand or to sell my brand or to license my brand, I have to check what other agreements there were in this market. So from this market, we can go from 2 to 5% royalty rate for using the brand, for example. I have to check where am I in that range and where is my brand sitting in that range. The thing of this methodology is that not every time you have comparables, not every time you have in the same market comparables for what you're doing. And the third one is cost-based. And cost-based would be how much should I put in money to create a brand to get to what this brand is today. For example, how much would it cost me to create Coca-Cola with this level of awareness and with this level of recognition in the different markets? The thing is, sometimes we can spend a lot of money in a not good way and not generate the result that we're expecting. And sometimes we can have synergies and spend little money to create a brand that is really strong. So as I said, I'm going to go into detail in the income-based approach. That is the approach that Interbrand created in '88, 30 years ago. The logic of the methodology is more or less the same. What we are changing here are the attributes that we are looking. So we're bringing into a more relevant things that today impact perception of the consumers, perception of clients, and the market dynamics that today are established in each of the brands. How we calculate this, how we get to those numbers. In a really simple way, we look at three things. And it doesn't matter if we're looking to Samsung worldwide or we're looking to a brand that is operating only in the Zona Sul of Rio. We're looking to the financial performance of this brand, how much it's generating money, how much it's generating value, what is the influence of the brand in the purchase decision, what is the role of the brand in the purchase decision, and then what is the strength of this brand compared to its competitors, how relevant this brand will still be in the next years. Going through each of the different components of this, first of all, what Marco was saying, we are going to check how much economic value this brand is generating for the future. What we do, we see the revenues, we discount taxes, operational costs, and the shareholders' return that they are expecting. Everything that comes after this is what we call economic profit. It's a measurement like the EVA, the economic value added. It's a way of knowing how much this business, and we are still talking about business, we're not talking about brand still, is generating for the next 5 years, for example. Okay, so $500 million in 2020, good. How much is brand? How much the brand is influencing on this? We go to the second step, the role of brand. To get to the role of brand, we are going to understand why the client is buying, for example, that cell phone. Why they're choosing Apple and not Samsung and not Dell or whatever brands that we're talking about. What is the importance of the brand in the purchase decision relative to other factors that are also influencing the decision? How we're doing this? First of all, we have to understand why people buy the product, why people buy this thing. So what are the drivers of demand? It could be price, it could be distribution, it could be the specifics of the product. And then we can see what is the influence of the brand in each of those attributes. We can do it with research to better understand why people are choosing from one player to the other. Why people rely on brand and why people choose one brand or the other. First of all, sometimes it's a really confused market. So I'm buying detergent, for example, for my house, and I go to the supermarket. I have like 7 brands and thousands of brands. Everybody's making the clothes more white. They're taking out the spots. They're almost the same prices. So the brand is also helping me to guide this decision, to guide from one expectation to the other. Sometimes I cannot compare. I cannot understand the real difference between one product and the other. So I have to trust one brand to choose from the other. Or sometimes we are in a market that is really an emotional decision, not a rational decision. Why would I buy a Louis Vuitton bag? What is the specifics that is driving me this decision? So this is the kind of thing we are going to measure when we measure the role of brand. In the end of the day, we are going to have a percentage of what is the brand influence inside of my purchase decision. This influence could be really high, or this influence could be really low. It's really hard to see, but when we're talking about, for example, the luxury market, so we're talking about this Louis Vuitton brand, for example, it can go to 67% of the purchase decision. So 67% of my decision is coming from the brand. So the brand becomes really important in what I'm picking. If we go to the other side, 18% is financial services. So I'm choosing from bank A to bank B, and 18% is due to the brand. Of course, it depends on which market you are. So here in Latin America, because of our history, we have to trust more the bank, and we have to put a little bit more influence into the banks that the brand that we are picking, because some banks in the past have failed and we had problems with it. This percentage is what we are going to apply in those financial cash flows. So if I'm saying it's 20% of those $500 million in 2020 coming from the brand and not from the other ones. Because I'm talking about an asset that is generating value for the future, I have to understand how much it's probable or how much it's feasible that this brand is continue to generate results. For this, we do have a methodology to better understand the risk related, and we call it brand strength. We look at 10 factors from inside to outside to better understand how the brand is generating value for the future too. To get to those factors, we are going to look at things, and I think here is important because this is what explains a lot of the brand value that is being generated from the clarity internally of the brand positioning. Do people understand at AT&T what is the positioning of AT&T? What are the values that we are going to transmit? Is it understood by the employees? What is the level of commitment with this brand? So people are committed to building this brand. Are they engaged to build? What are the governance process? Is this a brand that is protected, for example, legally? Is there a brand governance process internal that makes sure that everything that is being built is connected to what we want as value, as positioning? What is the responsiveness of this brand? How much we are answering the needs of our customers, and how fast we are reacting to those needs? And if we are building those 4 factors internally, well, we can have an external impact. From authenticity, how much this brand is delivering its promises, how much of those promises are relevant for the client, are those important promises, is this brand attending the most important drivers of demand? Is this brand delivering it better than the competition? Is it differentiated? The experience is consistent between the different touch points. If we think about the digital versus physical experience of a brand, is it consistent? Is it still the same brand? It still feels the same brand? How present this brand is in the minds of consumer, in the market? And in the end of the day, how engaged people are with this brand? Am I having consumers, or I'm having fans that are going to put in their Instagram hashtag Starbucks, for example, and they are true ambassadors of our brand? This analysis will give us from 0 to 10 in each factor score, and it's a 0 to 100 score in total. 50 is the middle of the category. So if I have a brand with 50 points as brand strength, I'm more or less like my competitors. If I get to the 6, 7, 8, I'm stronger than my competitors, and I'm stronger than most of the direct competitors that I have. If I'm talking about a 9 or a 10, it's a global brand that is a reference in everything they're doing. So if we get to presence attribute, for example, and we think about Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola is relevant for the guys that are doing sodas and competing directly with them, like Pepsi, but also for a bank, also for Netflix, also for Amazon. They are relevant for every single category. If I'm talking about 4, 3, 2, it's a brand that is below main competitors, is having issues in some of those attributes, or 0, 1, either is a brand that is still being born and still growing, or is a brand with a lot of problems. In the end of the day, this analysis, this 0 to 100, will give us a discount rate for our cash flows. So we need to understand what is the risk related to this brand. The higher the brand strength, the lower the risk, so the lower the discount rate I'm going to apply. The weaker the brand, the higher the discount rate I'm going to apply. What we are going to do is coming from those revenues, discounting the costs to get to the economic profit, applying the role of brand to get to the brand earnings, bring it to present value to better understand what is how this money is worth today. In a really simple view, this is what would happen when we think about our methodology. So we start with the financial analysis, going all the way to the economic profit. So discounting the operational expenses, the taxes, and the capital charge to remunerate the shareholders and the banks that are putting money in this operation. We use this role of brand, the percentage that the brand has as influence in the purchase decision, to get in this example, 25% of the total results are coming from the brand. But because we are talking about the value of the money in the future, we have to better understand how much it's worth today. So this is why we get to the discounted brand earnings with the brand strength analysis to get to the current value of the brand. Because this brand is not going to disappear in the year 5, and it's going to still be there, we also apply what we call a perpetuity to make sure that the value after this is still being considered to get to the total value of the brand. I know it's little time to a lot of concepts, and I'm glad later on to go into detail if you guys want in each of the things. But more important than how to calculate this, it is how to generate value from this. So how people are choosing the brands, what we saw as role of brand analysis, how strong is this brand compared to competitors, so those 10 attributes that we were considering, and what is the financial value being generated from this. In the end of the day, we see a lot of examples of strong brands in the market, but not necessarily they are generating value, either because they have low margins, either because they're destroying value as a business. So connecting those two things is really important. I brought some slides here that go beyond the brand valuation and bringing some of the insights that we got from the best global brands that we launched 1 month ago in New York. What we saw, first of all, when we compare, let's say, an ideal portfolio of the best global brands from Interbrand compared to Standard & Poor's 500 or the Morgan Stanley Index, is that brands are generating more value than the average of the market. So everything that I was saying about those 10 factors of generating financial results, it's happening in real life. They even can have problems. So when we think about 2008, for example, that destroyed a lot of value, the strong brands also suffered from this, but when they get back really strong. So they can connect better with consumers. What we learned from these 2018 best global brands. First of all, when we add the 100 brands value, we're talking about $2 trillion as brand value. It's a lot of money, and it's a lot of result over there. And it's growing from year to year. So from last year to this year, it grew 7.7%. Imagine those brands are global. They are really into every single markets that are doing really well, but some markets that are not doing really well, and growing 7.7% is a lot in this. And when we think about the percentage that the brand is worth compared to the total business value, we're talking about 26% of average. This could be really high in some cases. This could be in the luxury business, for example, it could go to 80% of total value. In some cases, like when it's more tangible assets driven industry, it could go to 5%. But we're talking about 26% of the total value of a company. What is the importance of this? How important is the brand manager of those companies to make sure that these numbers is growing every year? When we think about the main sectors, luxury, $105 billion when we add all the brands, and it's growing 42% from one year to the other. Retail, 36% growth. Financial service, $132 billion and 10% growth. Automotive, $275 billion, and technology, $731 billion worth as a segment. What those brands are doing to connect with people to make sure that it's generating these kind of numbers and these kind of values. It's amazing. There are new entrants, and it's really interesting to see completely different companies, completely different brands from completely different categories, but generating value. From Chanel to Spotify to Nintendo to Subaru, what those brands are doing to connect with people and being one of the global top brands. And which brands are doing the best in growing? Think about Amazon, for example. Amazon from last year to this year grew 56% in brand value. 56%. Netflix, 45%. What are those brands doing? I'll say, okay, it's technology, everybody's doing well. Ferrari, 18% growth in brand value. And when we think about our top 10, and it's really interesting to see the change in the market from 10 years from now. I entered Interbrand in 2006, and since always, Coca-Cola was the brand #1 in the market, was the most relevant brand. And it was worth about $67 billion as brand value. 10 years later, here's Coca-Cola, worth more or less the same number, more or less stable, but was surpassed by Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. So then we see and we better understand how those technology brands are connecting to people in such a way that they become relevant in their day-to-day life and generate those results. It's what's making the difference, and what their responsiveness and their presence and their differentiation is what is making their results. So this is what we have to consider when we think about those 100 brands in the table. What is generating those values? What is behind those values? Because this is what later on we are going to license. This is what later on we are going to negotiate. The influence of the brand is not only about its logo and not only about its name, but how it's influencing the perception of the clients and how differentiated it is from the main competitors that it is today. That's what I wanted to share with you guys, and I'm completely open for discussions and hope you enjoyed.
Thank you, Andre. Very interesting as well. And I think that there's some issues that I would like to discuss. Also, looking from the perspective of a counsel, legal counsel. One thing that you mentioned is the strength of the brand. What differentiates that brand from other participants in the market? What differentiates the technology from other technologies in the market, particularly if it's a standard, for example? And why I mention this, in my practice, when working in corporate restructuring and allocating value in different jurisdictions or companies, subsidiaries, and others, one of the things that we need to discuss and ensure when we're putting together a contract is, from a tax perspective, what will justify for my client either to pay a higher royalty or to charge, if it's the case, a higher royalty. From a tax perspective, this could be challenged. And you as counsels need to bear this in mind. Because, again, we can build up a very beautiful contract, but then when it comes to enforceability in terms of making it efficient, bringing in the revenue, a lot of red flags start jumping up, and they will turn to you and say, you never advise on this. A special character means that a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi-Cola base of flavor, the concentrate that is used to then be diluted and become a drink. As a matter of fact, Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola probably by now have no manufacturing premises of final product. So they are selling that, but they're not manufacturing it. The business model is based in that a specific formula that may allow them to produce a concentrate that is not known by the public. Therefore, trade secrets become relevant here. But the final point I want to go to is, when we work in this type of structures, and we work with the tax team, we ensure that we have the documentation at that very start of the drafting of the contract that will allow the team at an X jurisdiction to justify the tax authorities what we call the special character, what differentiates a product from other, even if it's a commodity. Because someone could come and say, well, it's, base flavor concentrate. That's a commodity. You go outside and you will find flavor houses and you will be able to buy from them. Why are you paying more for the Pepsi Cola or the Coca Cola flavor or concentrate? Because there's a special character. And I need to prove that when it comes to a challenge from the tax authority. Again, remember that we are in a world that is changing a lot from a tax and transparency perspective in terms of the numbers, and therefore we're getting more sophisticated in terms of BEPS guidelines, in terms of arm's length operations, and as a council, you need to look at that in detail. So what you, Andrea, were sharing with us as to how to prove that that brand has an extra, why there is a prime value. You need to bear that in mind when you're working on this to ensure that there is the documentation as when it comes to transfer pricing in which you may support and benchmark. So one question on this side, Andre, is like when you're looking at generating royalties and structuring, what type of um, brief or executive summaries do you prepare for the financial team to be ready to respond to why something has to be paid more or receive more?
Yeah, I normally those 10 attributes that explain why a brand is strong are the main uh, channels to better justify this. The brand could be strong because it's internally being built strong. So the clarity of people, for example, developing this brand, or the processes internally that this brand has to do the better governance of this, or externally. So differentiation, for example, the Coca-Cola case. What is the differentiation of Coca-Cola among competitors, or what is the presence of Coca-Cola among competitors? That would justify, like a stronger brand would justify a higher royalty rate, for example, or a higher license agreement than competitors. Remember that all those 10 attributes that we are showing are always in comparison with competitors. So I'm going to have a 6 or 7 scale if my competitor is going to have a 4 or a 3. So it's always in comparison to your main competition and connected to your main competition.
And I think this is absolutely relevant for the day-to-day business because I'm pretty sure that most of you have encountered yourselves in a situation in which the business team, and probably you can share with us something on those lines, Dave, is that there's part of a business team that is driven to profit, and they think that doing some changes, bringing a new jurisdiction in, bringing some technology to other company, and then entering into intercompany agreements, they will shift the revenue to a, I will say, a more uh, beneficial jurisdiction. However, as councils, we need to discuss this appropriately because this cannot be emotionally driven from the point of view of, oh, we're going to make more money. It has to be functionally, we put in those words, in terms of, is this going to work? What is going to happen with the tax authority when they come to us and they say, listen, I do not agree in you paying 10% of royalties. Where's the benchmark? What is this based on? So probably, Dave, if you can help us on how to, in your experience, how for councils and the teams, how to manage those expectations and to ensure that we are able to deliver a message to the decision making team that things are not just like that, because sometimes the big boss comes and says, I want this to be done like that. Probably he's not going to listen to technical considerations behind it that will say this is not going to make any sense in the long run. But probably if you can help us on how to discuss these expectations, how to manage expectations, and the legal counsel serenity into the process.
Well, that's I was trying as we were talking, trying to map that into our space, and I guess the one area, especially in licensing, when you have standard essential patents, that you enter into FRAND, fair and non-discriminatory licensing, which then we turn around and talk to our legal team to validate those assumptions. And it's quite interesting that fair and non-discriminatory, you would think would mean one price across an entire marketplace, but it really doesn't. Many variables that come into play. So getting the legal team to analyze that, the implications of saying that this company has this much revenue, therefore they actually pay a higher percentage, generate a higher royalty. I'm not sure if that really addresses your question, but
It's like bringing people down to reality in terms of let's do something that is going to work. Let's build up a contract and an agreement with other companies, whether subsidiaries or outside, that is going to work. I know that there is a lot of anxiety in thinking big. There are people within the company that are looking at their targets at the end of the year. They need to reach this number. That also means personal bonuses. And all of this is mixed in that process of defining. So one is at the same time looking at the company's interest, but also looking at what's the pitch for me.
And I think in any large corporation, you're going to have those competing interests, and ultimately, these things tend to escalate up to a level that can make a decision, unfortunately, that may impact one area or another. Ideally, we'd like to think that we're all working for the same company, making intelligent choices for the organization. As you said, personal uh, compensation may be tied to hitting numbers in a specific area. And metrics are, in my book, are very dangerous. They drive behavior, and you need to make sure that whatever you're measuring makes sense for the company as a whole.
Just adding, I think in the end of the day, it's bringing more rational arguments for this definition. When we talk about intangibles, again, it could go from your perception of a brand, from my perception of a brand, or for Dave's perception of a brand. If you bring rational attributes in this consideration, I think it lowers down a little bit of this will to put whatever thought you have into this brand.
Well, one more comment is, especially when you're dealing with selling intellectual property, it's like selling art. It's very thinly traded, and I've never entered into a negotiation with a potential buyer where we weren't here and they were here, right? And so closing that gap, especially with something, you can come up with all sorts of financial models and you can rationalize each of those financial models, but at the end of the day, it's got to be a win-win for both companies.
And you said something that is very important when you're negotiating here. Win-win. You want the company to be able to reach the goal. To say, well, either is I want a license or I need to license my technology. So I think the role of a legal counsel, based on my experience and probably that experience as well, is that you need to be that part of the team that will put the pause when necessary. You need to realize when to intervene, and as they were saying, when to suggest a particular point to be escalated. Because again, there's a lot involved. There are personal thinkings, egos, ideas, expectations, and the legal counsel has to be very careful because whatever is going to come out from that process is going to be drafted into an agreement, and people are going to turn to you saying you missed this. As counsels, we do not need to be the experts in taxation, in valuation, in the technology, but we do need to have a clear idea of how this works. Because otherwise, you won't be able to bring it all together into a contract that will then materialize the negotiation. And it comes to another point here that they've shared before. It's like doing some specific agreements is not easy. So if you're going to go into licensing, if you're going to go into a joint venture which includes technologies, then client is expecting a client like Dave from his perspective, is expecting to have a legal counsel that knows his business and that is very clear of the do's and the don'ts that we have to look at it.
Yes, that's a very crucial point. Um, Oftentimes, I work with corporate counsel that doesn't share uh, my objectives or what I'll call the company objectives of driving revenue. They don't have any skin in the game, right? And their motivation is to protect the company from any possible uh, uh, legal issue. And the reality is it's the same in engineering. Protection takes an infinite amount of time to achieve. So what you've got to do is the best lawyers are ones that can evaluate the risk, that are not trying to be risk free, but are willing, willing to understand the risk. Let's make a conscious decision which ones we accept, put it in the contract, get the deal done.
Thank you. And we're really not running out of time, but probably just one last thing to talk. Andre, I share with you, and I think that the valuation method, the methodology that was developed by Interbrand is very comprehensive. I mean, it's beyond DCF. That it brings into those elements that are absolutely needed when you're talking about intellectual property. Now, what about if you can share with us, because probably most of us will come up to a point in which our client will say, well, I'm not using DCF. I'm not looking into any other more complex system. It's like when you take finger out and said, I'm going to go for market share. I'm going to go and see sales. I'm going to put all this together, and I'm going to use the EBITDA. Any comments on using, EBIT and say, well, I'm going to be paying for this company you benchmark that kind of 3-4 times EBIT, but then you're not taking into consideration other things.
That's when we think about comparables and multiples. The thing is, your brand is not 100% comparable to the other ones. When we sometimes we even use this kind of measurement in Interbrand as cross-check to understand what we are measuring with our income-based approach makes sense into the comparables approach. Because, okay, I have this really strong brand that is driving all the difference in the market, and it's 5 times EBIT, for example, but our market is only 1.5 EBIT. So this helps us also to have a range of negotiation to see what is the maximum you should charge for it and what is the minimum you should go for it. So you establish your negotiation path for the future too.
Thank you. I want to stress this again because my experience in more or less 20 years of being doing this work is that when there is a tax issue, because those are the issues that come after monetizing your IP, the company will turn to you and say, now go and explain this to the tax authority and justify it. Yes. Why you pay that value? Why? And remember that when companies pay a value for acquiring IP, they're not only going to say, well, I'm paying this, I'm taking this in. Is how do I use or benefit from a tax perspective of this expense? It's an investment, it's an expense. How am I going to use it within a time frame? And the local tax authorities will turn and say, come and explain me. You talk about clients list. I remember a case in which one of the intangibles around the intellectual property, and listen to this because it's very, very interesting. We were acquiring technology in the chemical industry. We did a big acquisition, large group of companies, manufacturing facilities, very high tech because of the manipulation of this chemical. And we put together a new company, but there were 20 employees of the former company that we need them to continue with us. What did we do? Is we said, okay, we're going to bring this know-how of these guys who were trained for years, and we are going to give them a stimulus so that they don't feel they want to leave the company, because the other company will be shutting down, will be paying them their indemnification, and people with a lot of years in a company will get a lot of money, and probably they will turn and say, oh, I'll go home and I'll probably open a, I don't know, bookstore with that money. We didn't want that to happen because training those guys or training other people will take forever. So we said, listen, we will acknowledge all the time that you have. We will pay you a bonus to shift to our company. And all of that money, when we completed the structure, we put it in within the investing money of the operation, and we deducted. Of course, the tax authority in 3 countries came out saying, come on, how did you do this? I mean, you're bringing in people, you're paying wages and salaries. That is not deductible as, for your tax income as a whole. It was very hard, and we have to go to courts for this, to evidence how this intangible has a value. And this value was linked to intellectual property. It was a know-how of how to manage these chemics, how to produce and bring the product to the market. So there's a lot involved. But the first things that we will start looking at as contingencies are the tax authorities raising their hands. So just to share this, and to finalize, I think that most of us normally confront complaints of our clients like, listen, you're managing my portfolio, but that's a lot of money. I would like to pay less. I think both Dave and Andre today gave us figures that we can bring back to our clients and say, listen, I'm taking care of more of the 26% of your company's value. And you should be careful and put some money into it because you're not talking about anything else but your company's future. So that is something that we should bring back for to remind our clients that we're rendering a high-level, complex service and that we're taking care of their most valuable asset. So Dave, Andre, if you don't have any closing comments, I'd like to appreciate your presence. Andre flew in today to be with us, and he's flying back for a meeting this afternoon. Dave came all the way. He's been traveling around the world and made some space to join us in this Congress.
It's my pleasure.
So I thank you very much, and please a big applause to our participants.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, but if we can take 1 or 2 questions, we can do that. I know we're being almost kicked out, but if there's any question, we can probably, open the floor for that. 1 question? Okay.
2.
Yeah, please. We don't want to take your time out of lunch, but it's going to be, I think it's going to be interesting to probably hear to one question and then we wrap up.
My question is on real options. Do you have an approach on that? Did you use them? Real options. Do you use them? Do you have an approach on them?
For Interbrand, we don't use real options as a method for this, but it could be interesting. It could be interesting to see how to measure the value regarding the brand with real options.
Okay, we have one more question. The last question, please.
In terms of valuation, in order to raise capital for as a collateral the future flows, can you give us some examples of those cases?
Here in Brazil, we had some clients using their brand as collateral for rising investment or financing the operation, or even brands that are with real financial problems and putting their brand as a collateral for getting a big investment from the bank, for example. So this happened in the financial crisis a lot, unfortunately, but this is happening even more and more. The thing is, you're putting your brand as a collateral, so the risk you're taking is huge. In this way, it might be your last option sometimes. It's your asset that is more valuable, so you can use this.
Yes, I'd also comment on my earlier experience in startup companies is that's really what you're pitching to investors is your intangibles. You don't really have a product yet. It is high risk. You've got to make a very good case that that these ideas be turned into a real business.
No, and thank you for the question, because that's a point that probably the structure that we put together for the workshop and the time limitations wouldn't allow us to go further into how to bring that into the financial segment. And I think it's something that we may discuss in a next CP meeting, but it's something that is becoming more and more relevant. Again, you need to have what is the support to that type of value as a collateral, particularly because the bank authorities in each country are going to look at the quality of the collateral to ensure that it is something that if it's not paid, there's a default, will suffice, and they won't ask you to reserve an amount of money. So again, thank you very much for the remaining audience, and thank you, Dave and Andre, and I
Thank
hope that
you.
you guys enjoy the work.